Mormonism Unveiled by John D. Lee, 1877. Read by Paul Martin, 2019. Copyright Paul Martin's Fine Films and Audiobooks. Chapter 23. Trial of Lee Continued. Jacob Hamblin. Sworn for the prosecution. Howard. Where did you live in August and September 1857? My home was supposed to be at Clara, but I occupied the mountain meadows in the summer with my stock. What county was Mountain Meadows in at that time? It was considered in Iron County. It was before Washington County was organised. It is in Washington County now? Yes, I believe it is. Do you remember the time of the massacre? I was not at home. I left before it happened. I got back 7 or 8 days after. How long before it happened was it that you left home? I don't know. I met the company at Corn Creek and camped with them there. You were going north to the city? Yes. When you returned, had the massacre taken place? Yes, sir, it was done before I got home. I heard of it before I got home. When you got home, what did you find there on the ground? Well, there were the bodies of the company lying about there. Were they dead or alive? I didn't see any live ones lying there. How many dead ones did you see? I suppose over 100. Did you count the skulls there? The next spring I took my man and we buried over 120 skeletons. I don't remember exactly. Something like 120. 2 of us gathered up the bones. Did you count the skulls? Yes, sir, we counted them. Can you now remember how many there were? I think there was 120 odd. I'm satisfied it was over that, but I don't just remember the number. After the massacre, did you have any conversation with John D. Lee about it? I don't know, as I did after I got home. Did you see him before you got home on that trip? I did. I met him at Fillmore. Was that after the massacre? Yes, sir. It was this side of Fillmore. I told him I heard a rumour of it among the Indians, and he told me about it. State whether he had any boasts to make about it, or communications concerning it. If so, what and how? I asked him how it came up, or something of that kind. He said that the emigrants passed through and threatened to make their outfit out of those outlying settlements, and that he could keep the Indians back, and he had to go and lead the next attack. And he got a bullet hole through his hat and shirt, and then afterwards got more Indians and had to decoy them out. Tell me the whole conversation. I will if you will let me. That was the conversation. I talked about it with him, and he justified himself in this way, that the Indians made him go out and lead the next attack. Afterwards, they called on the Clara Indians, and that he decoyed them out, and they massacred them. Did he say where he decoyed them out? Decoyed them out of the emigrant camp. Did he say why the massacre took place? Yes, I believe he gave reasons for it. What were they? Well, that the attack had been made by the Indians, and that they could not keep them back, and it was supposed expedient that there was an army right on our border, that they would lead to giving the people much bother and trouble, and that they would testify against them and so on, and it was thought best to use them up. All that could tell tales, that is, as near as I can remember. Who did he say concluded that? I don't think he mentioned any names. Did he tell you whether any other white men were with him or not at the time he led the attack? He said that there was no one with him. Did he tell you how it happened that he got down there and was there alone? Yes, I told you. He went out to watch them and keep them from making their outfit from the outlying settlements, and the Indians could not be restrained. How long did he say that attack was made before the massacre? It ran along 3 or 4 days, he told me. Cross-examined. In the conversation that you had with Lee, did he not state to you that after the attack had been made by the Indians upon the emigrants that word had been sent to Cedar City for assistance to save the emigrants from the Indians? Yes, sir. Said they sent word there. Who did he tell you sent word to Cedar City? He did. He sent word. What did he tell you that word was that be sent to Cedar City? He sent word that the emigrants had been attacked, that the Indians were very mad, and he didn't know how to keep them down. Give as near as you can the conversation you had with Mr. Lee at the time you refer to. I believe I have. Didn't he tell you that Haight and Higby sent back word that the emigrants must be destroyed because of the fact that Stewart had killed Alden at the Springs? Didn't he mention something of that kind to you in that same conversation? I don't remember as he did. He spoke of some man being shot at Little Pinto in the course of the evening. It was after the Indians had attacked, if I remember right, that some men left the camp and undertook to go to Cedar City and were killed on the way. 1 or 2, I think, and 1 or 2 came back. Go on and tell all that he told you about it, about the killing of the man at Pinto, how it was done, and all about it. I don't know that I can. I remember that he said that there was one killed, that they went out to see if they could get help from Cedar City. 2 or 3 went, and 1 was killed, and 1 or 2 came back in the night. I don't know, but that they got back to camp. Did he tell you what word was sent back to him from Cedar City after that time? Yes, he told me something about the message that came there. Tell me what was said about it. One message came to not disturb the emigrants, and after the message went, that they had been attacked. I think he said that there was 1 that they all killed or used up. Go on, and tell what he said was in that last message. He was explaining it to you. I am satisfied the message was, it commenced, that they should be used up or something like that. Did he tell you who that message was from? I don't think he did. Did he tell you where it was from, whether from Cedar City or elsewhere? No, he used the language that he got word. Redirect. Do you believe what he said, that he got a message to use up those immigrants from any authority? I don't know that I do. Don't you know that he lied about it? No answer. Don't you think he did? No answer. He was telling you this in justification after the massacre. Yes, he told me that. I asked what he called for such an act, and he told what the reason was. He gave you the reply in his justification. He said he got word to use them up, that this army was on the borders. He got word that being commenced, that on account of the army being on the borders, that he had better finish it? Yes. Did you understand that that came from Higby or Haight, that word? I don't think he said. Do you know the relations existing between Higby, Haight and Lee, so as to know from whom it came? I would expect it would come from Isaac C. Haight if any word was sent from Cedar City. If it was north, it would be from Parawan, but I don't think he told me where it was from. Klingensmith was in a position, I suppose, to send such word, if any was sent. Klingensmith was presiding bishop. If it was orders in a military capacity, it would be somebody else. If it was in a military capacity, who would it have been from? The way I understand it, it would be Dame. If he told the truth, an authority came to him from a superior military officer, and if it came from an ecclesiastical, who would it have been from? It would have been from Klingensmith. Jacob Hamblin. Recalled. Howard. I am not in the habit, Your Honour, of recalling a witness this way, but I was not fully posted in regard to all the facts that Mr. Hamblin would testify to. I have found he knows some additional facts, and I will ask leave to examine him further. How far above this place, Beaver, was it that you had a conversation with John D. Lee? It was about some springs this side of Fillmore, probably 7 or 8 miles. How far is Fillmore from here? About 60 miles. How far is Cedar City from here? Supposed to be 55 miles, 53 to 55 miles. Is there any other place called Cedar City except Cedar City? No, sir, I don't know any. It is called Cedar or Cedar City. How far is it from Cedar City to Parawan? 18 miles. I used to suppose it was. I have heard it called that. How far is it from Parawan to Harmony? About 35 miles. It is supposed to be. Is Harmony on the road, or is it off the road from Cedar City to the Meadows? It is 12 miles south of the road. Where do you leave the road going from Parawan to the Meadows to go to Harmony? We leave it 2.5 miles below Cedar City. Then it is off to the left as you are going? Yes, sir. Where is Pinto? It would be within 7 miles of the north end of the Meadows, where my ranch was. What was the condition of the Meadows at the time with regard to being a good stopping place for travellers? At that time, it had a very luxuriant growth of grass all over the valley, and springs at each end. It was considered a good stopping place for companies, and was occupied by myself and 2 or 3 others at the north end. We had then formed a settlement called the Clara. In this conversation that you had with Mr. Lee, did he say anything to you about the manner in which, or by whom, the men had been drawn into that massacre? If he did, will you state all he said in your own way? It was a long while ago, but I recollect him telling me that there were white men there, and that they didn't know what they were going for until they got there, and some would not act, and some would. What do you know about the disposition of the property of those emigrants? There was none on the Meadows when I got there that I saw. I saw 2 or 3 young men driving 200 or 300 head of cattle going to the Iron Springs. Afterwards I saw them on the Harmony Range that drove of Texas cattle. Whose range was the Harmony Range? It belonged to the Harmony settlement, the citizens of Harmony. Do you know of Mr. Lee using any of those cattle, butchering or using any of them? He had charge of them. Bishop. To save time and trouble, we will admit the corpus delicti. Of course it is understood that counsel cannot admit anything against his client in a criminal case, but there will be no question raised about it. It is an undisputed fact that something like 120 people were killed about that time and at that place, and that the number of people charged in the indictment were killed there will be no question. That they were killed in that place, there will be no question. We will never argue before any court that there has not been a killing as charged in the indictment, except that we will always argue that the defendant did not do it. Calling your attention back to that conversation, I will ask you to tell the court and jury in your own way what Mr. Lee told you in regard to his personal participation in that killing, if he told you anything. Well, I believe I told it here yesterday, that he spoke of white men being engaged in it, and that he made an attack at daylight, that he could not keep the Indians back. They were so mad because one of their men got killed and another wounded, that he led the attack and got a bullet through his hat and another through his shirt. The talk was something like this. They went out there to watch the emigrants and see that they should not get their outfit from the outlying settlements, that the Indians made the attack at daylight, and one of them got killed and another wounded, and that raised their temper to such a pitch that they went for him and compelled him to lead the attack, which he did once or twice, once anyway, and got the bullet through his hat and one through his shirt. The emigrants were so strongly entrenched they could do nothing with them, and afterwards they were under the necessity of decoying them out with a flag of truce, and they came along in the meadows to where the Indians were lying in ambush, and they rose up and massacred them. The emigrants were unarmed. Tell what else he told you. Well, he spoke of many little incidents. Mention any of those incidents. There were 2 young ladies brought out, whom by an Indian chief at Cedar City, and he asked him what he should do with them, and the Indian killed one, and he killed the other. Tell the story as he told you. That is about it. Where were those young girls brought from, did he say? From a thicket of oak brush, where they were concealed. It was an Indian chief from Cedar City. Tell just what he said about that. The Indian killed one, and he cut the other one's throat, is what he said. Who cut the other's throat? Mr. Lee. Tell me what Mr. Lee said. State the circumstances of the killing. What conversation passed between that Indian chief and Lee, and the conversation between the woman and himself. I don't know that I could. Tell all you can remember about it. You say the chief brought him the girls. I think I have told it about all. Go over it again. Tell us all the details of the conversation of the killing. Well, he said they were all killed, all, as he supposed that the chief of Cedar City then brought out the young ladies. What did he say the chief said to him? Asked what he should do with them. What else did the chief say? He said they didn't ought to be killed. Did the chief say to Lee why they should be killed? Well, he said they were pretty and he wanted to save them. What did he tell you that he said to the chief? According to the orders that he had, that they were too old and too big to let live. Then what did he say took place? What did he say he told the chief to do? The chief shot one of them. Did he say he told the chief to shoot her? He said he told him to. What did he say the girl did when he told the chief to shoot her? I don't know. Did she cover her face? No, he didn't say she covered her face. Did he say she pulled her bonnet down over her face? He didn't tell me so. Who did he say were by then that shooting took place? Indians standing around, a good many. After the chief shot that one, did he tell you what the other one said or did to him, Lee? I don't think Mr. Lee did tell me. Did he tell you himself who killed the other one? I told you that he said it was a Cedar City chief that killed one. Who killed the other? He did, he said. How? He threw her down and cut her throat. Did he tell you what she said to him? No. Who did tell you that? The Indians told me a good many things. Didn't Mr. Lee tell you that she told him to spare her life and she would love him as long as she lived? Lee didn't tell me that. Did you ascertain in that conversation, or subsequently, where it was, that they would be killed? When I got home, I asked my Indian boy, and he went out to where this took place, and he saw two young ladies lying there, with their throats cut. How old was he? 16 or 17? What was the condition of those bodies? They were rather in a putrid state. Their throats were cut. I didn't look further than that. What were their ages? Looked about 14 or 15. At what point were their bodies from the others? Southeast direction, towards some thickets of oak. How far off? About 50 yards. Were those bodies up a little ravine, a little way? Yes, on a rise of ground. What were their ages about? 13 to 15, I would suppose. Did you learn from the children or from any other source their names? Well, I suppose I did. What name? There was a little girl at my house, I found with my family, that was in that company. She said their names were Dunlap. She claimed to be their sister. How old was she? 8 years old, she said. Did you go up there and find those bodies yourself with the assistance of the Indian boy? I walked over the ground, looked at it all pretty much, and saw these two bodies. He told you where those two bodies were to be found, did he? Yes, sir. The others had been buried slightly, but those two hadn't been. There was quite a number scattering around there. What became of the children of those emigrants? How many children were brought there? 2 to my house and several in Cedar City. I was acting sub-agent for Forney. I gathered the children up for him, 17 in number, all that I could learn of. Whom did you deliver them to? Forney, Superintendent of Indian Affairs for Utah. Were there any of the wagons or any property burned there on the ground? I never saw any sign of burning, and never heard of any being burned. Cross-examined, Bishop. What day in September was it that you had this conversation with John D. Lee, about 7 or 8 miles this side of Fillmore? I don't recollect the date. I left the city about the 14th and came directly there. Who was present at that conversation? A man by the name of Bishop. That was not me? No. That man had 2 good eyes, and you have but one. What bishop was that? Was he a Mormon bishop? No, he was not a Mormon bishop. He was a merchant. He had been hauling goods from California and dealing here, some in those settlements. Can you give me his other name? No, sir, I never heard it. Was it Jesse Bishop? I don't know his other name. Lee told you, and this man Bishop, all about it. Got you two together and told you. I don't think Bishop heard the conversation or much of it. Did Bishop hear any of it? I don't know that he did or that he didn't. Then why did you say that he told you and this man Bishop? I said he was there. You heard the conversation? Yes, I heard it, but I don't know as any other man heard it. There was a man present by the name of Bishop. He was in the same camp. Where were you at the time this conversation took place? I was 5 or 6 miles this side of Fillmore at the Springs. What time of day was it? It was afternoon sometime. Which way was John D. Lee travelling at the time you saw him? Going north to the city. You were going south? Yes, sir. Tell me what he said about the orders that he had. You have said that he told the chief to kill the little girl and that he killed the other because his orders were that they were all to be used up. He said he had orders to use up all that company that could tell tales. Where did he get these orders from? Did he tell you that? I told you no, that I don't remember that he did. Do you recollect that he didn't? If he did, I don't recollect it. I want to get as full a statement of facts as possible. I want you to tell me everything that you think he said, or that he did say. When did he tell you that he got those orders from Cedar City? It was my impression that he got them from Cedar City, but I could not say what the man said about it. But I had that idea. Who else did he tell you was on the ground aiding in his killing? The names I don't know as he mentioned. I think he mentioned Bishop Klingensmith being there. Who else? He mentioned Higby being there. Who else did he mention? He mentioned my brother being there, bringing some Indians there. He sent him word to bring the Indians up there, sent him word of this affair taking place, and for him to go and get the Indians and bring up the Clara Indians. Your brother then brought the Indians to the meadows, and then left there. Yes, he told me so. Now, how was it about the Indians making an attack about daylight? Were they repulsed? Yes. One killed and another wounded? Yes, sir. That enraged the Indians, and so Lee led the next attack? Yes, sir. Who do you mean were so enraged? The Indians? Yes, the Indians. He claimed the idea that he had to do it to save his own life. They were very mad and wanted him to help use up that company. Did he not tell you in that same conversation that he tried to appease the Indians and keep them from attacking the train? I don't remember just the words, but he said he could not keep them from attacking them just at daylight. Didn't he tell you that he tried to keep them off? I don't think so. I think he said he could not keep them off. Did he say anything about the Indians calling him any names because he would not go? He went off towards the Clara and cried, and they called him Crier, Yarguts. Why did they call him this? Because he cried. That was before he led the attack? I don't know. Are you positive that he told you that he cut that woman's throat? Yes, I am positive of that, or I would not have told it. How long is it since you have told anybody that John D. Lee had told you that? It has been about 3 seconds. Where have you lived since the Mountain Meadows massacre? My family has been at the Clara. The most of the time, the last 6 years, have been at Kanab. You have lived in Utah all that time. My home has been in Utah. This has been your home? My home has been in Utah. Didn't Lee tell you more than you have told? Didn't he tell you about a council that was held on the field before the massacre? He told me. We had a good deal of conversation about it. Tell me if he did not inform you that a council was held on the field on Mountain Meadows by the people from Cedar City before the massacre, and that he opposed the killing of the emigrants until he found that he could do no good. After we had talked some time, I asked the necessity of such a thing, or why it was, and he told me that he had orders to do so. Did he not tell you that there was a council held there at the Meadows, and that it was then decided that they should be killed? No. I never heard that there was a council held there to make any decision or to decide anything but the subject of counselling how to decoy them out. Who counselled with him? There was Klingensmith, the Bishop of Cedar City. Who else counselled with him? I think he said John M. Higby. I am satisfied it was. Did he tell you how long before the massacre it was that they talked this over? I don't think that he did. You were a sub-agent, an Indian interpreter at that time, were you not? Right away after that, Forney appointed me as sub-agent. At that time, I was no agent, nor in any particular office, unless a missionary in the South Country to establish some settlements on the Clara. What reason did Lee give you in that conversation for the killing of the emigrants? He must have given you some reason why it was necessary to commit such a deed. I asked what called for it, why they did it. He said that attack at daylight would have thrown censure upon this people. On what people? The people that were living here. Do you mean the whites that were living here at the time? Yes, sir. Go on and tell all he said. I want you to make it as bad as you can. Tell all you said, all that he said. I would not undertake that. Tell all that you can recollect. I have, the substance of it. There must have been a good deal said about the reasons for doing this thing. The cause that he always gave to me was that which I told you, that after they came there and behaved very rough and said that they helped kill old Joe Smith and were going to be ready there at the Meadows when their teams got recruited, and when Johnston commenced on the north end, they would be on the south end, and he was asked by authority, Haight or Dame, to go and watch those emigrants and see that they didn't molest those weak settlements. When I asked him what it was for, that in doing so, when they got there, the Indians made this attack at daylight. The Indians then made the first attack? He said they made it voluntarily. They made the first attack. You spoke of General Johnston's army marching towards Utah. Where was it? At Fort Bridger then. Who was it understood that Johnson was understood to be marching against then? The understanding and feeding was that he was marching against the Mormons as a people, church or nation, and was going to try to burst up the whole concern. That was what we expected. You expected then that Johnston was, with the army of the United States, was leading that army against this people? Yes, sir. With the intention of exterminating them or compelling them to abandon their religion? Yes, sir, that was my belief. To do away with the Mormon religion. How long before that had it been that this same feeling or fear or anxiety had been felt by this people, occasioned by Johnston's approach? I think it had been 2 or 3 months. It came south at the time. I think it was the 24th of July, when a celebration was held in one of the canyons, that word came that Johnston was on his way. After that 24th of July, did that report have any effect on this people to cause them to organise as a military people? No, that was organised before that, as far as I knew, and was acquainted with the council. From that time on, up to that time of the Mountain Meadows Massacre, tell me if the people were organised as a militia and enrolled as such. The instructions we had from George A. Smith, who was sent as representing President Young's mind, was to save everything like breadstuff and use it when we wanted it. Did the people ever meet and drill, have exercises and musters so as to make them understand the use of arms and make them familiar with military tactics? Yes, sir. There used to be drills sometimes those days. Was it not a general occurrence for them to meet and drill? Yes, they drilled at Fillmore and Cedar. I don't know about Harmony, using as much effort as possible to perfect themselves in military tactics. They were always doing that. They did it in Illinois. Did you not understand that all the men between 18 and 60 years of age were enrolled in the militia? Yes, I understood it so. Who was the highest military officer in this division? William H. Dame was first in command in the southern country. He was colonel of the Iron Militia, as I understood it. I was out a good deal. Who was the highest military officer at Cedar City? Well, that I could not testify to, but I think it was Isaac C. Haight, but I would not testify to it, because I don't know. State if you know whether John M. Higbee belonged to the militia or not. Well, he belonged to the militia, but whether as private or officer, I don't know. How many men did John D. Lee tell you had gone from Cedar City to the Mountain Meadows, and that were present at the time of the massacre? Well, if he told me, I have forgotten. Did you ever have a conversation with him or with any other person as to how many or how many were there? No, I don't know that I had. I heard there was something like 50 in all from Cedar City and from below there, but that is nothing but an idea, not founded on facts as reports. You spoke about Lee telling you that there was a necessity for killing those young girls because they were older than those that his orders permitted to save. State now, if he did not tell you in that conversation some reason for the killing of the Growan people. The reason was what I told you. Did he not say that if they were permitted to go, they would tell the tale in California about what had been done there by the Mormons? His talk was, and his excuses were, that it would be a bad thing for the people of Utah if it was known and got out in such a troublous time. It would be much trouble on the Mormons as a people. Was not that trouble to come from their notifying the people of California of what had been done? Well, yes. When I interrogated him about what he said, I think he said it would have a tendency to bring trouble from California. Did he not tell you that that was the understanding of the people, that if they were permitted to go, that it would call an army from the south, and that was the reason these instructions were sent as they were? He didn't say anything about the people. Did he not tell you why the instructions came to him as they did? He did not tell who it came from. He said he did it by authority. Did he not tell you that he did it by authority, and the reason that authority gave was that these parties, if permitted to go, would raise a war cloud in California? I don't know, as he did. He said it would lead to bringing an army down upon us. That was what he told me. Did he tell you anything further? I think I've told you all that was important that John D. Lee said. Did not John D. Lee tell you in that same conversation that after the Indians made the attack the first time, that one or more men started from the emigrant camp for Cedar City and met some men going to the emigrant camp from Cedar City, that they met at the Springs, and that then young Aidan was killed by William C. Stewart? He gave me an account of it. Tell me what he said about it. I can't do that. Then give the substance of it. It would be from memory, and there might be an error in it. He told me he spoke of 3 men starting back to go to Cedar City to get assistance and to give information of what was going on after the first Indian attack. During that time, there were 3 men went out in the night, and one was killed at Little Pinto, 4 miles this side of the meadows. I don't know who he said killed them. I don't know, as he said, that he knew. I think one was killed there, and the other got back to their camp. They wounded one in the night, and the thought was this would lead to trouble if they were permitted to go on account of this man being wounded and telling how it was done, and what had happened in the past was about his language. What had happened would lead to bringing trouble, perhaps an army on the southern people, and especially that action at the Springs in the killing of that man. Did Lee tell you who was at the Springs at that time? No, if he did, I don't remember. Did he say this to you, that it was understood by the authorities that one man was wounded at the Springs and one man killed by Stewart, and if those people were permitted to go to California, they would notify the people of California that the whites had made an attack in conjunction with the Indians, that they would lead an army from the south and west, and that for safety they considered it necessary as a war measure to kill those people? I think he told you that, Mr. Bishop. I told you that when I asked him, he told me that that would lead to bringing an army here. I am satisfied. That is what he said. But as to the particulars of the killing at Little Pinto, I could not say. Only that a man was killed there, and one wounded, and they had got back, that the attack at daylight was the cause of the emigrants being killed. Mr. Hamblin, have you now detailed to the jury all of that conversation that you had with John D. Lee at the time, that you met him 7 or 8 miles this side of Fillmore? I think I have, that I recollect distinctly enough to mention here. I may think of something else. You say you saw some of the cattle on the Harmony Range. How many people use that range for their cattle? I think something like 20 families. Do you know who took charge of the stock immediately after the massacre? I met 2 young men driving it, between 200 and 300 head. Who were they? They lived at Cedar City. I did not know them. They said they were going to drive them to the Iron Springs, and then afterwards I learned that John D. Lee took them. Who were those young men? I do not know. I was not acquainted with them. I was not much acquainted at Cedar City. They lived there, they said. How far did you live from Cedar City at that time? My family was then 28 miles from Cedar City at the Meadows. Did you spend any time at Cedar City soon afterwards? When I came through, I stopped about 10 minutes. I was on an express. Where were you carrying the express? I was going to overtake another company. Colonel Dame was afraid they would jump into them and wanted me to go and see to it. Afraid who would jump into them? The Indians. Where did you get that express? From him. Where at? At Wildcat Canyon, 8 or 10 miles north of here. That was when you were coming from Salt Lake. That was. After you had left John D. Lee. Yes, sir. Who were you carrying that express to? To the Indians, if there were any. He said he had learned they were following up this company. What company? The company that was following up the company that was massacred. They were stopped here a while, and the Indians wounded one, or killed one, or something. Have you ever given this conversation that you had with Lee to anyone, to the public generally? I do not ask if you have stated it to the counsel in the case, but to others. I have no recollection of it. Have you ever given it to any court or jury, or given a statement of it? No, sir, not at all, not until now. Have you ever given a report of it to any of your superiors in the church or officers over you? Well, I did speak of it to President Young and George A. Smith. Did you give them the whole facts? I gave them some more than I have here, because I recollected more of it. When did you do that? Pretty soon after it happened. You are certain you told it fuller than you have told it here on the stand. I told them everything I could. Who else did you tell it to? I have no recollection of telling it to anyone else. Why have you not told it before this time? Because I did not feel like it. Why did you not feel like it? You felt and knew that a great crime had been committed, did you not? I felt that a great crime had been committed, but Brigham Young told me that as soon as we can get a court of justice, we will ferret this thing out. But till then, don't say anything about it. There have been courts of justice in this territory ever since that time. I have never seen the effects of it yet. I have seen it tried. Then this is the first time you have ever felt at liberty to tell it? It is the first time I ever felt that any good would come of it. I kept it to myself until it was called for in the proper place. You feel now that the proper time has come? I do indeed. I presume you have talked it over with friends, and they advised you that this would be a good time and place to tell it? I had an idea that if I came here, it would be a pretty good place to tell it. And in pursuance of that idea, you are going on to tell it? Yes, sir. Are you certain that you have told all that you know about it? I'm certain that I know all I tell. Answer the other part. I think I have all that is important. Have you told it all? No, sir, I have not. Then tell it. I will not undertake that now. I would not like to undertake it. Redirect, Howard. How long have you known John D. Lee? Between 30 and 40 years. How long is it since Mr. Lee ceased to be so ardent in his feelings and religious zeal that he was willing to run the risk he did down there at Mountain Meadows to defend his religion? What I knew of him, he was pretty zealous in what is called Mormonism. He was at that time. How is it now? Bishop, we object to the question. It is not expected that a man should be called a criminal for giving up his belief in such a church. It is wholly foreign to the question at issue. Objection sustained. Note: to fully appreciate the evidence of this witness, Hamblin, read what Lee says about the acts of Hamblin and Nephi Johnson in the stealing of the cattle from the Duke's train. Nephi Johnson, recalled by prosecution. Howard, I will introduce the question I have to ask by asking you if you know anything about this subsequent company, the Duke's Company. Yes, sir. What do you know about that? Objected to upon the ground that it relates to a matter subsequent to the crime as charged in the indictment. Question withdrawn. What conversation did you have with Mr. Lee after the massacre? When I arrived at Harmony, John D. Lee was there. How long was this after the massacre at the Meadows? Only a few days. Where did you go from? I started from this city to Cedar City at my father's ranch. Where were you going? Going with the company to see them safe through the country. When you got to Harmony, did you see John D. Lee? Yes, sir. Did you have any conversation with him? Yes, sir. What conversation? He asked me to take the company into the mountains in the Santa Clara and that he would follow with the Indians and kill them. Did he tell you that he had authority to do that? No, sir. I said I would not do it. I said that I was sent to see the company safely through the country and that I would do it or die. That there had been enough blood spilt at Mountain Meadows. He called me a great many names and passed on. Cross-examined. You made up your mind then to die for the emigrants. Did you try to die for them at Mountain Meadows? No answer. Nephi Johnson recalled. Howard, by permission of counsel for defence, I will ask one question. Bishop, ask as many as you desire. Howard, how long have you known John D. Lee? Since 1851. Do you identify the prisoner at the bar as the John D. Lee spoken of by the witnesses and in your own testimony? Yes, sir. Cross-examined. Where did you live in 1851? Parawan, Iron County. What time did you go to Iron County, Parawan? In the spring of 51. Where did you come from when you went there? Came from Salt Lake Valley. Where did you come from to Salt Lake? From Illinois. Which part? Knox County, Illinois. When did you leave Knox County, Illinois, for Salt Lake? I think it was in 1849. Then you have lived in Utah all the time since? Yes, sir. The defendant introduced no witnesses, but rested his case upon the evidence that had been introduced by the prosecution. The case was then argued for the prosecution by Howard and Denny, and for the defendant by Foster and Bishop. The court instructed the jury at length. The jury, after a few hours' deliberation, returned a verdict of guilty of murder in the first degree. A motion was afterwards made and argued for a new trial. The court overruled the motion, denied the application for a new trial, and sentenced Lee to be shot. The case was appealed to the Supreme Court of Utah Territory and argued in that court by Honourable Frank Tilford and Sumner Howard for the people and by William W. Bishop for Lee. The Supreme Court sustained the judgment and sentence of the District Court and ordered the District Court to fix a day for carrying the judgment into effect. The District Court again sentenced John D. Lee to be shot to death and fixed the day for execution on March the 28th, 1877. Mormonism Unveiled by John D. Lee, 1877. Read by Paul Martin, 2019. Copyright Paul Martin's Fine Films and Audiobooks. Chapter 24. Names of assassins claimed by Lee to have been participants in the Mountain Meadows Massacre, or privy thereto. Names of those who were on the ground and aiding in or consenting to the killing of over 120 men, women and children at the Mountain Meadows. 1. George Adair Jr. 2. Benjamin Arthur. 3. Ira Allen, dead, member of High Council of Church and City. 4. William Bateman, dead, carrier of flag of truce. 5. John W. Clark, dead, lived at Washington, Utah. 6. Thomas Cartwright, dead, lived at Cedar City, member City Council. 7. E. Curtis, captain of 10, Cedar City. 8. Joseph Clues, then of Cedar, now at Los Angeles, California. 9. Jabez Durfee, Cedar City. 10. Edwards, Cedar City. 11. Columbus Freeman, then of Cedar, now of Corn Creek, Utah. 12. John M. Higby, first councillor to Isaac C. Haight, and Major of Iron Militia, in command at Massacre. 13. Oscar Hamblin, dead. 14. Charles Hopkins, dead. 15. William Hawley, now residing in Fillmore, Utah Territory. 16. John Hawley, died in Indian Nation. 17. Richard Harrison of Pinto, member of High Council of Church. 18. George Hunter of Cedar City. 19. John Humphreys of Cedar City. 20. Samuel Jukes of Cedar City. 21. Nephi Johnson of Cedar City, Indian interpreter. 22. Swen Jacobs of Cedar City. 23. John Jacobs of Cedar City. 24. Philip Klingensmith, Bishop of Church at Cedar City. 25. Samuel Knight of Cedar City. 26. Knight. 27. Dudley Leavitt of Cedar City. 28. A. Loveridge of Cedar City. 29. Daniel McFarland of Cedar City, son-in-law of Isaac C. Haight, and acting adjutant at the time of massacre. John McFarland, attorney at law, St. George, Utah. 31. James Matthews, dead. 32. John McMangnum of Cedar City. 38. Samuel McMurdy of Cedar City, first councillor to Bishop Klingensmith, assisted in killing wounded. 34. James Pierce of Washington, Utah. 35. Harrison Pierce of Washington, Utah. 36. Samuel Pollock of Cedar City. 37. Dan C. Schertz of Harmony, now of Potato Valley, Utah, son-in-law of John D. Lee and Indian interpreter. 38. William Slade Sr., dead of Cedar City. 39. William Slade Jr. of Cedar City. 40. William C. Stewart of Cedar City. 41. Joseph Smith of Cedar City. 42. Arthur Stratton of Virgin City. 43. Tate of Cedar City, has since been a captain of militia. 44. John Ewer of Cedar City. 45. Joel White of Cedar City. 46. Elliot Wilden of Cedar City. 47. Robert Wiley of Cedar City. 48. Samuel White of Cedar City. 49. Alexander Wilden of Cedar City. 50. John Weston, dead, of Cedar City. 51. William Young, dead, of Washington, Utah. 52. John D. Lee, executed March 23rd, 1877. Accessories before the fact. William H. Dame, Bishop of the Church at Parawan, Colonel of the Iron Military District, and first man in authority in southern Utah. He gave orders to Isaac C. Haight to have the emigrants exterminated, and did not deny the same when accused of it by Haight on the field after the massacre, while examining the dead bodies. Isaac C. Haight, president of that Stake of Zion at Cedar City, Utah Territory, Lieutenant Colonel of the Iron Military District, the man who directed Lee to see that the emigrants were exterminated. George A. Smith, one of the 12 apostles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who preached a crusade against all who were opposed to the Mormon Church through the settlements in southern Utah immediately before the Mountain Meadows massacre. Now dead, also reported. Accessories after the fact. Brigham Young, to whom John D. Lee made a full report of the massacre, giving names of persons engaged in the crime and every fact within his knowledge in less than a month after the same was committed. The man who said God has shown him that the massacre was right. The man who ordered John D. Lee to keep the whole thing secret. The man who pretended to aid Judge Cradlebow to discover the guilty parties, and while pretending to do so was preaching at Cedar City and elsewhere that damnation would be the fate of all who presumed to give evidence against the brethren who had committed the crime. The man who gave officers and concubines to John D. Lee and Isaac C. Haight as a reward for their acts at the massacre. The man who controls the every act of the Mormon people and makes slaves of his followers. The man who teaches the doctrine of blood atonement as a religious duty to be performed by the faithful Latter-day Saints. The man who assumes that he does nothing except by direct authority from heaven. The greatest criminal of the 19th century. Daniel H. Wells, the man who has done everything that he could possibly do to carry out the will of Brigham Young and defeat the United States officers in their attempts to enforce the laws of the United States. The man who directed the witnesses that it was the will of God, as made known through Brigham Young, the prophet, priest, and revelator, under the new dispensation, that John D. Lee must be convicted but that no evidence should be given that would implicate any others of the brethren who aided in the butchery at Mountain Meadows. Next, every Mormon who has tried to screen the guilty perpetrators from punishment, among whom may be named George Q. Cannon, who disgraces the government of the United States by holding a seat as delegate to Congress from the territory of Utah, and who wrote many articles for publication in the vain effort to prove that the massacre was an Indian massacre without help or advice from the church. Lastly, all who pretend that John D. Lee and those who assisted him in the massacre acted contrary to the orders of the Mormon priesthood. End of chapter 24. Mormonism Unveiled by John D. Lee, 1877. Read by Paul Martin, 2019. Copyright Paul Martin's Fine Films and Audio Books. Chapter 25. The Execution of John D. Lee. John D. Lee was executed on Mountain Meadows, Washington County, Utah Territory, at the scene of the massacre on the 28th day of March, 1877. As to the reasons which prompted him to act as he did during his lifetime, we have nothing to say. Judging from his life and confessions, and our personal acquaintance with him, we believe him to have been an honest man, but so blinded by religious fanaticism and faith in his corrupt church leaders that his moral vision was perverted, and he committed crimes again under the orders of his superiors, believing that he was doing right and working for the glory of God. It appears from his writings that he was used by Joe Smith, Brigham Young, and other Mormon leaders from the time that he became a member of the church as a tool to perform their dirty work, and when he was worn out and could no longer be of any service to them, they sacrificed him with as little compunction of conscience as a carpenter would throw away an old worn-out saw or chisel. The only wonder is that Lee, who was an intelligent man, would allow himself to be so often and so grossly deceived, and still repose confidence in his leaders. The answer to this is that he had the utmost faith, a fanatical faith, in the truth of the Mormon religion, and believed that no other doctrine would enable him to attain immortality and future happiness. In addition to this, he had married a number of wives who had borne him children, for all of whom he seems to have entertained a warm fatherly affection. And if he had left the Mormon church, the law would have compelled him to give up all his wives except the first one, and his children would have been branded as bastards. His life, too, would have been in danger from his former associates, as he says himself, and they would either have blood atoned him or reported his crime to the civil authorities and secured his conviction. All these reasons kept him in the church, and while there he felt that it was his duty to himself, his family, and his God to obey his rulers and those who were in authority over him. The rulers of the Mormon Church teach their deluded followers that they are inspired men, that they act by direct authority from God, and that disobedience to their orders is rebellion against God. They also teach that those who carry out their orders in the commission of murders and other crimes are only instruments to perform the will of God, and are not responsible for the sins which they commit in obeying the orders of their inspired rulers. It is hard to believe that people of any intelligence whatever could be so shamefully deceived, but when men and women are thoroughly imbued with religious fanaticism, they are capable of believing or doing almost anything, provided it is sanctioned by a "Thus saith the Lord" from the lips of some holy man or prophet, pretending to have his authority from revelation. Christianity itself furnished too many sickening examples of this kind a few centuries ago. Thus John D. Lee was led on, step by step, from one crime to another, until his leaders had made all the use of him they could, and then they sacrificed him to a felon's death, in order to save themselves and cover up the sins of the Church. On Wednesday, preceding the day fixed upon for the execution, the guard having Lee in charge started from Beaver City, where Lee had been imprisoned, for Mountain Meadows, where it had been decided to carry out the sentence into execution. The party consisted of United States Marshal William Nelson, a military guard, the prisoner, District Attorney Howard, a few newspaper correspondents, and about 20 private citizens. The authorities had received information that an attempt to rescue Lee would be made by his sons and a body of his personal friends, and precautions were taken to prevent the success of any such attempt. The place of execution was kept a profound secret, except with the marshal and a few trusted friends, and a strong guard was procured. Lee either knew nothing about the intended attempt at rescue, or else he placed no confidence in it, for he uttered no word or expression to indicate that he had any hope. He was cheerful and resigned to his fate, and seemed to have but little dread of death. The party reached Mountain Meadows about 10 o'clock Friday morning, and after the camp had been arranged, Lee pointed out the various places of interest connected with the massacre, and recapitulated the horrors of that event. A more dreary scene than the present appearance of Mountain Meadows cannot be imagined. The curse of God seems to have fallen upon it, and scorched and withered the luxuriant grass and herbage that covered the ground 20 years ago. The meadows have been transformed from a fertile valley into an arid and barren plain, and the superstitious Mormons assert that the ghosts of the murdered emigrants meet nightly at the scene of their slaughter, and reenact in pantomime the horrors of their massacre. The ground is cut up into deep gullies, and the surface is covered with sagebrush and scrub oak. Meadows Spring, where the emigrants were encamped when they were first attacked, is situated at the lower part of the plain. At the time of the massacre, this spring was on a level with the surrounding country, but it has since been washed out until it forms a terrible gulch some 20 feet in depth and 8 or 10 rods wide. About 13 years ago, Lieutenant Price and a party of soldiers collected all the bones of the murdered emigrants that could be found on the field and erected a monument of loose stones over them on the banks of the ravine. The monument is about 3 feet high, oblong in shape and some 20 feet in length. Many of the stones of which it was composed have fallen into the ravine, and the monument is in keeping with its surroundings, dreary, desolate, and decaying. The curse rests upon the whole landscape. The marshal's party removed some of the loose stones down to the level of the earth, but no trace of bones or human remains could be found. Decay and desolation mark everything. The accompanying illustration, engraved from a photograph taken a few minutes before Lee's execution, gives a correct view of the present appearance of the meadows. To this dreary spot, the scene of one of the most revolting crimes that ever disgraced humanity, John D. Lee had been conveyed to bid farewell to life and be suddenly hurled into the unknown realities of eternity. His sentence, doubtless, was just, but it's so what ought to be the fate of the men who counselled and commanded him to do what he did. Among the number, Brigham Young stands head and foremost by reason of his position, and if the curse which rests upon the scene of the butchery does not follow him with the horrors of the damned, fate is unjust. He proved himself a traitor to his faithful friend and slave, as well as a murderer at heart, and as sure as there is a God in heaven, just so sure will the curse of that crime come home to him. If the law should fail to reach him with its retributions, the ghost of John D. Lee will haunt his lecherous pillow and scorch his sleepless brain with visions of everlasting woe. As the party came to a halt at the scene of the massacre, sentinels were posted on the surrounding hills to prevent a surprise, and preparations for the execution were at once begun. The wagons were placed in a line near the monument, and over the wheels of one of them army blankets were drawn to serve as a screen or ambush for the firing party. The purpose of this concealment was to prevent the men composing the firing party from being seen by anyone, there being a reasonable fear that some of Lee's relatives or friends might wreak vengeance upon his executioners. The rough pine boards of the coffin were next unloaded from a wagon, and the carpenters began to nail them together. Meanwhile, Lee sat some distance away with Marshal Nelson and quietly observed the operations going on around him. The civilians and those specially invited as witnesses were allowed to come within the military enclosure, but all others were required to station themselves at a considerable distance to the east of the ravine. At 10:35, all the arrangements having been completed, Marshal Nelson began to read the order of the court, and at its conclusion he turned to Lee and said, "Mr. Lee, if you have anything to say before the order of the court is carried into effect, you can now do so." Lee replied, "I wish to speak to that man," pointing to the photographer, James Fenimore, who was adjusting his camera nearby, preparatory to taking the group of which Lee was the central figure. "Come over here," said Lee, beckoning with his hand. "In a second, Mr. Lee," replied Mr. Fenimore, but it was more than a minute before he could comply with the request. Lee, observing that the artist was occupied with his camera, said, "I want to ask a favour of you. I want you to furnish my 3 wives each a copy," meaning the photograph about to be taken. "Send them to Rachel A., Sarah C., and Emma B." Honourable Sumner Howard, who was standing by the side of the instrument, responded for the artist, whose head at the moment was covered by the hood as he was adjusting the camera. "He says he will do it, Mr. Lee." Lee then repeated the names of his 3 wives carefully, saying to the artist who had just approached him, "Please forward them." "You will do this?" Mr. Fenimore responded affirmatively, at the same time shaking Lee by the hand. Lee then seemed to pose himself involuntarily, and the picture was taken. He then arose from his coffin, where he had been seated, and looking calmly around at the soldiers and spectators, said in an even and unexcited tone of voice, the last words of John D. Lee. "I have but little to say this morning. Of course, I feel that I am upon the brink of eternity, and the solemnities of eternity should rest upon my mind at the present. I have made out, or have endeavoured to do so, a manuscript abridging the history of my life. This is to be published. In it I have given my views and feelings with regard to all these things. I feel resigned to my fate. I feel as calm as a summer morn, and I have done nothing intentionally wrong. My conscience is clear before God and man. I am ready to meet my Redeemer and those that have gone before me behind the veil. I am not an infidel. I have not denied God and his mercies. I am a strong believer in these things. Most I regret is parting with my family. Many of them are unprotected and will be left fatherless." Here he rested 2 or 3 seconds. "When I speak of these things, they touch a tender chord within me." Here his voice faltered perceptibly. "I declare my innocence of ever doing anything designedly wrong in all this affair. I used my utmost endeavours to save these people. I would have given worlds, were they at my command, if I could have averted that calamity, but I could not do it. It went on. It seems I have to be made a victim. A victim must be had, and I am the victim. I am sacrificed to satisfy the feelings, the vindictive feelings, or in other words, am used to gratify parties. I am ready to die. I trust in God. I have no fear. Death has no terror. Not a particle of mercy have I asked of the court, the world, or officials to spare my life. I do not fear death. I shall never go to a worse place than I am now in. I have said it to my family, and I will say it today, that the government of the United States sacrifices their best friend. That is saying a great deal, but it is true. It is so. I am a true believer in the gospel of Jesus Christ. I do not believe everything that is now being taught and practiced by Brigham Young. I do not care who bears it. It is my last word. It is so. I believe he is leading the people astray, downward to destruction. But I believe in the gospel that was taught in its purity by Joseph Smith. In former days, I have my reasons for it. I studied to make this man's, that's Brigham Young's, will my pleasure for 30 years. See now what I have come to this day. I have been sacrificed in a cowardly, dastardly manner. Lee enunciated this sentence with marked emphasis. I cannot help it. It is my last word. It is so. Evidence has been brought against me, which is as false as the binges of hell, and this evidence was wanted to sacrifice me, sacrifice a man that has waited upon them, that has wandered and endured with them in the days of adversity, true from the beginning of the church, and I am now singled out and am sacrificed in this manner. What confidence can I have in such a man? I have none, and I don't think my Father in heaven has any. Still, there are thousands of people in this church that are honourable and good-hearted friends, and some of whom are near to my heart. There is a kind of living magnetic influence which has come over the people, and I cannot compare it to anything else than the reptile that enamours his prey, till it captivates it, paralyses it, and rushes into the jaws of death. I cannot compare it to anything else. It is so, I know it, I am satisfied of it. I regret leaving my family. They are near and dear to me. There are things which touch my sympathy even when I think of those poor orphan children. I declare I did nothing designedly wrong in this unfortunate affair. I did everything in my power to save that people, but I am the one who must suffer. Having said this, I feel resigned. I ask the Lord my God, if my labours are done, to receive my spirit. Lee ceased speaking at 10:50 a.m. He was then informed that his hour had come and he must prepare for execution. He quietly and coolly looked at the small group of spectators. He was still very calm and resigned. Reverend George Stokes, a Methodist minister who had accompanied Lee as his spiritual adviser, then knelt on the ground and delivered a short prayer. The minister was deeply affected by the solemnity of the occasion and was very earnest in his supplications. The prisoner listened attentively. At the conclusion of the prayer, Lee exchanged a few words with Mr. Howard and Marshal Nelson, saying to the latter, I ask one favour of the guards. Spare my limbs and centre my heart. He then shook hands with those around him, removed his overcoat and comforter, presenting the latter to Mr. Howard and giving his hat to Marshal Nelson. The Marshal then bound a handkerchief over the prisoner's eyes, but at his request, his hands were allowed to remain free. The doomed man then straightened himself up, facing the firing party. As he sat on his coffin, clasped his hands over his head and exclaimed, Let them shoot the balls through my heart. Don't let them mangle my body. The Marshal assured him that the aim would be true, and then stepped back. As he did so, he gave the orders to the guards. Ready! Aim! Fire! The 5 men, selected as executioners, promptly obeyed. They raised their rifles to their shoulders, took deliberate aim at the blindfolded man sitting upright on his coffin. about 20 feet in front of them, and as the fatal word "fire" rang out clear and strong on the morning air, a sharp report was heard, and Lee fell back on his coffin, dead and motionless. There was not a cry, nor a moan, nor a tremor of the body. There was a convulsive twitching of the fingers of the left hand, which had fallen down by the side of the coffin, and the spirit of John D. Lee had crossed over the dark river and was standing before the judge of the quick and the dead. His soul had solved the awful mystery, and the curse that hovers over mountain meadows had marked one upon its list of retribution. The end.